Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this final day of the Art for Tomorrow conference here in Florence. Steps away from this St. Regis Hotel where our conference is taking place is the Church of Ognissanti, which dates back, of course, to the Renaissance and even earlier, and has an absolutely wondrous array of paintings and frescoes, and it's also the final resting place of Sandro Botticelli, a painter you've all heard of. In a chapel, his place is marked with a reproduction of a painting of his face. And so I was there, kind of on a pilgrimage yesterday, and thought back to last summer when Botticelli was in the news again. Two environmentalist activists from the Ultima Generazione group glued the palms of their hands to his masterpiece painting Primavera, which lives in the Uffizi galleries, as you know, and is one of the most visited artworks in Italy, and even possibly in the world. Is it possible to see a spring as beautiful as this today, said one of them. And a third unfurled a banner against oil and gas exploration. Now, I imagine that our friend Botticelli must have been turning in his grave when this happened, and this grave being located right next door to us here at this conference venue. And thankfully, no damage was done. In the months that followed, all the way up to the United Nations Climate Summit in Sharm el-Sheikh in November, there were attacks, vandal attacks, by environmentalists on a slew of masterpiece paintings, as you all know. You've seen the videos, by people like Vermeer, Van Gogh, and Monet. Mashed potatoes were flung at the Monet in Potsdam, Germany, and in London, 2 cans of Heinz tomato soup were opened up and splattered all over Van Gogh's sunflowers by a pair of young activists from the Just Stop Oil movement. And a third of them, of course, captured them on video, and this video is something you can all see on YouTube. Just go, National Gallery, Van Gogh, Just Stop Oil, or whatever search word, and you will see the full video, which of course went viral. What is worth more, art or life? Shouted one eco-activist, the 21-year-old Phoebe Plummer, and you could hear in the video the visitors gasping and saying, security, and then Phoebe said, are you more concerned about the protection of a painting or the protection of our planet and people? And I think this is pretty much the quandary that we're going to be addressing in our conversation this morning. The eco-vandals may have attracted the attention of millions of viewers around the world, but they also drew major alarm from the directors of top world museums. I don't know if you signed that petition, Anne. Anne was on there. Anne is the director of the Brooklyn Museum. There were many dozens of museum directors who signed a statement that said that they were deeply shaken by the actions of these eco-activists who severely underestimate the fragility of these irreplaceable objects, which must be preserved as part of our world cultural heritage. There's no question that the climate is a planetary emergency, that human beings and governments, all of us, need to be shaken up and awakened to this extraordinarily serious threat and menace to humanity and to the future of all of us. I mean, we may literally have no future. But is vandalism the way to go, and vandalism of art I'm referring to, even when no damage was done, as was the case in all of the attacks that I described to you, because there was a coating of glass on each of these paintings, which were I suppose, attacked. Anne, as I said, you're the director of the Brooklyn Museum, one of the major museum directors of America. It's wonderful to have you here this morning.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Anne,
Wait, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Why am I always on the panels around protest? For those people out there, I just want to say one day I want to be invited to talk about something other than activism. But yes, go on.
But you were on a panel with me last summer, and that was
That's true. That was very rare. It's true. Thank you.
We were we were at the Armory show, and we weren't talking about protests. Yeah. So, Anne, I just wanted to know, as a museum that has a very important collection, what your thoughts are on this and how you would have reacted, and if you had one of these events happen.
Sure. Well, who knows how I'd react in the moment. I'm a little nuts. But let me first say that, to be very clear, I absolutely do not condone acts of violence towards anything or anyone. And so I am not in support of these acts of violence against artworks. And in fact, I read an email this morning that arrived yesterday sometime that at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., there was they believe climate activists who attacked Degas' original wax dancer with black and red paint. It was under plexi. One hopes that there was no permanent damage. So it's very of this moment that this is continuing to happen. But let me also say that I'm a Libra. And what that means is that I take everybody's input and I try to balance these things out. And clearly, we are in a moment of clear climate catastrophe. And I absolutely understand why climate activists, who I'm grateful to for constantly ringing the alarm bells to this catastrophe, are using every means necessary to call attention to the situation we're in as a planet. And I would be worried if museums were not somehow or other involved in this conversation. It would mean that we were absolutely irrelevant, and we're not irrelevant. We should be a part of the solution. So I understand what's going on. I just kind of long for the good old days of like ACT UP and AIDS activism, where they were really creative about their activism and they weren't destroying anything, but they were having really great artistic kinds of actions that got global press and positive attention. I don't think this really, I mean, I don't know, I'm not an expert on the subject, but I really would have to question that this has any positive outcome for climate change.
Sorry. There's a little noise in the back there.
I was like, oh my God, I'm being protested.
I see what you're saying. And I mean, you're kind of walking a middle line, which is what we do as reporters, right? That's what we're supposed to do. But as a museum director, I was kind of hoping for you to be a little bit more, I mean, you have said that you don't condone violence in any way, and you kind of wish for a day when you had these ACT UP activists who weren't actually going around and damaging, or they're not damaging, they're just attacking, throwing things at art. But so, you know.
They could damage things.
Right.
They could damage things. And, you know, I'm assuming I had always understood that the hands were glued to the wall, not to the painting of the Botticelli, so I might be completely wrong about that. But if they glued their hands to the Botticelli, that would have created irreparable damage.
Yeah, apparently they were able to repair it, but I did see a picture myself last night again, and I saw the palms of the hands on the Botticelli.
Yeah.
I think it may have been glazed, but I'm not entirely certain. So yes, it's time for us to turn to our next guest, Clare Farrell, who is an important personality. She is the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, which is probably one of the most high-profile environmental groups in the world. And Clare, you're also a designer and a fashion designer.
Yeah, originally, yes.
Yeah, originally a fashion designer.
Huh? No, London.
So, Clare, I just wanted to know, I mean, I know you don't represent Just Stop Oil, you're Extinction Rebellion, and you are, you know, in a process of revising your methods of protest. But what do you think of these tomato soup, mashed potato, glue attacks on some of the greatest masterpieces in art history, which, of course, of which there's only one ever anywhere. It's not like movies, which can be reproduced, or books, or other art forms, plays, which can be, etc. There's just one of these.
Yeah.
So what, you know.
That's the conversation that these young people want you to have. There is only one continent called Africa. if we could just situate ourselves in the reality of what's happening in the world today, the last IPCC report said that by the end of this decade, up to 700 million people may be displaced on that continent. That is half of the population. Okay, let that sink in. In less than 10 years' time, half of the people on the entire continent of Africa may be displaced. Some of them will be displaced within that continent, many will not. We're facing something that I think nobody can actually get their head around the severity of it. And so when people say to me, oh, there's only ever going to be one sunflowers painting, I say, good. Good, you've started to have the right conversation. You've made the first step to having the actual, the real conversation about the situation we find ourselves in. This is an exponential situation. This is also something which came up in the last conversation about markets and about the increase in value. We do not understand exponential function very well as human beings. We do not find it easy to face the existential reality of what's taking place. And I think what these young people are doing, not only is it not damaging artwork, which if you compare to actions of the past, the suffragettes went with knives into galleries and they slashed paintings in half. People have done a lot worse for an awful lot less, in my opinion. What these young people are doing, I think, is iconic. I think it helps us to see the urgency. And I can also tell you that when they went and occupied oil terminals to stop the flow of oil, to stop petrol stations from having supply in the south of England, that was barely reported on. When people suspend themselves over a bridge and shut a road for 40 hours, those people, I have to say, Morgan and Marcus, some friends of ours, are now being sentenced with 3 years in prison for causing a very long traffic jam. When people do these actions, people talk about it. And I once went on hunger strike for 2 weeks over the expansion of Heathrow Airport. And a lot of people said to me, Claire, I'm so worried about you, and as if they thought I'd gone a bit mad. And actually, what I was able to turn around to them and say was, see how worried you are about me? Fucking worry about this. This is what we could accurately describe as a crime against humanity in the form of government policy. And as a response to the situation in the UK, now we're seeing everything push more and more authoritarian legislation, more restriction of our freedoms, more venomous policy against migrants. It's not going in a good direction, folks. And I think some powder paint on a snooker table or some soup on some glass on the front of a painting is the very least that people could be doing to draw attention, to bring the alarm again and again and again. And what everybody needs to be asking themselves is, what am I doing about it?
Yeah, okay.
And what next should I do with my privilege, with my money, with my access to power, with my voice, with my platform?
Right, yeah. I mean, the issue is, Claire, that humanity has also this priceless cultural heritage, a very, very large section of which happens to be in this country. What happens if, and how would you react if there was irreparable damage done to Botticelli's Primavera, or to one of the Van Gogh sunflowers, or to the Monet haystack?
Well, I'd say that's a very big shame, but it's really important to note that that wasn't the intention of the activists, and it hasn't happened. So, we have a big problem in the British media with people going, oh, but what if you did do that thing? And it's like, but we didn't. Can we talk about the things that we know? Well, you could speculate about something that might happen, or you can talk about the fact that we are going to hit civilizational collapse.
It's not speculation. I mean, you are not the conservator who replaced and glazed painting X, and there can be seepage. I've been speaking to museum directors, and they say that there is no zero risk. I spoke to the number 2 at Musée d'Orsay, and he says there is no such thing as zero risk. And this is what Anne was also saying. I mean, we can't, as environmentalist activists, you can't really be sure that we are not going to be causing damage to the cultural heritage of humanity. We're talking about humanity, culture, and humanity.
I understand that, yeah. But when you talk about there can't be any zero risk, that is also true of life. And we have put ourselves basically in such a high-risk situation. it's obscene for people to be more concerned about like potential damage to one piece of artwork when we know that we are seeing such extraordinary damage. People can't plant their crops in Spain. People in Asia are being told not to go outdoors. London was on fire last year. Like, what more do people need to see and need to understand to realize this needs big change? And it's the art world, I think, artists and people in the culture sector, and by culture I also mean the way that we conduct ourselves in politics and in our media and everything, needs to really recognize that we have lost touch with our humanity if we are more interested in a conversation about how some soup might get onto a painting.
No,
but we're not concerned with millions, if not billions, of people who are going to starve to death and die.
To be fair, I don't think we're more interested. We're just concerned.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're moving on to our next panelist, Aindrea Emelife. Aindrea is the curator of modern and contemporary art at the Edo Museum of West African Art, and it's very, very nice to have you here with us, Aindrea. What kind of thoughts come to your mind when you hear what our other panelists just said?
I think that I sort of occupy a space in between both of you. I recently wrote a book which is called A Brief History of Protest Art, and in doing that, a lot of it occupied quite a lot of the most recent protests.
Can we hear Aindrea better? We need more volume.
And sort of intersections between art and protest in recent years. And I think what's interesting is, as you mentioned, there's been a long history of art and artists being at the epicenter of trying to create activism or draw attention to social change. The suffragettes, for example, is a great example with the Rock of Venus. Picasso toured the Guernica for the Spanish war relief. And I think what we should be thinking about as curators, museums, directors, arts institutions is how we can incorporate these issues into our practice or into our places. Something that came to mind quite directly was how can we create perhaps a platform for social activism within a museum space or within a museum campus? What would it be like to commission a public artwork that people could respond to, and that can be a platform and that can be part of that discussion, so that there is still that conversation with art and social change, but it's done maybe outside of the museum walls or inside. It could be purposeful. I think it's important to bring these narratives into what we're doing, because as cultural practitioners, it's urgent, and it's important to allow for these artworks to have a relevancy beyond maybe the historic or the initial intent of the artist.
Yeah, excellent. I saw you nodding, Anne. Jump in.
I'm with you on this, and I think what's not clear often is how some of our institutions are actually allies in the work. So I think it's not limited to the artworks that we're commissioning or the artworks that we're showing, but our own internal practices and how we're involving our own internal practices. So the Brooklyn Museum is on a campaign to significantly reduce its carbon footprint. We just filled in all the cement in front of the museum, or a lot of it, and put in, lots of native perennial plants. We have bees on our roof, beehives we put on the roof, and now a lot of museums in New York City are hiring our same, hive guy and replenishing bee populations. There's a lot. I mean, we've eliminated a great deal of plastics in the Brooklyn Museum, but there's a lot of work to be done. Our entire practices, internal operations as a field, need to be significantly looked at. So there's the internal, but there's also the external, as you point to, but they both have to be aligned to really be allies in the fight against climate destruction.
Yeah. What about the point that Aindrea was making, which is American museums, we were hearing from Adam of the Whitney yesterday, American museums are also places where activism actually takes place. In fact, American museums sometimes not stage them, but kind of invite activism. So how does that take place at Brooklyn? Well, we like to think of ourselves as a place that really engages with the past and the present. We are, for example, there's the celebration's not the right word, the anniversary of 50th anniversary of Picasso's passing. A lot of institutions around the world are doing some very lovely shows. But if you read all the press leading up to, this moment, people are really interested in Picasso's misogyny, his behavior towards women, in particular young women. We're having an exhibition
conversation about that. And that
I know you
exhibition.
have Hannah Gatsby doing a show.
Hannah Gatsby's working with 2 curators in the museum, and she's come out and said, I hate Picasso, and why would we not have that conversation? And I know we're going to get killed for it. We're going to be attacked for having a conversation that happens around the dinner table, that happens in the press every single week. But I think our museums, in order to be relevant to today's audiences, need to engage in the very serious and thoughtful conversations they're having. And so here we are, a place for those conversations. And so we welcome that. We welcome the debate.
But I mean, let's say that our friend Clare, wants a platform to have a big, demonstration or make a big speech. Would she be able to come inside?
Claire, let's talk about it. Absolutely. Welcome to the Brooklyn Museum. I mean, our plaza has been the home for Black Lives Matter rallies, Black trans. Hundreds of thousands of people showed up in the steps of the Brooklyn Museum for Black trans rally. Right? It is a beautiful thing when our cultural institutions align with the movements of the day. That's a good thing.
Right.
So yes, Claire, let's talk.
Yeah, even when the movements can throw tomato soup at one of your works, but
I'm not sure how to respond to that. I think you have to be a part of the conversation or you're a part of the problem.
Okay. We have about 11 and a half minutes, so I'm going to be chatting away unless we have a question from the room. I did want, to bring it in now to the audience. Please, can you please introduce yourself when you ask your question?
Hi, my name is Lena, and
My name is Lena, and you are from?
I live in Florence.
Yeah.
And I have a question to both Aindrea and Anne about what Claire has said. What museums can do in order to talk about this urgent problem of climate catastrophe, so Claire and her colleagues don't have to throw potato mash and soup at the paintings.
It wasn't Claire, by the way. She wasn't the one doing the potato mash or the tomato. So
I apologize.
That's okay. Aindrea, I would like you to please perhaps tell us what museums can do, to preempt this kind of action.
Well, I think it was, that's where I was starting to try to ideate, is that how can we create a space for uplifting these voices and for having these important conversations. I think that can be done by way of, curating or commissioning exhibitions, whether it's done with commissioning artworks or, working with the public program and the outreach to create symposiums, because there's so much obviously in art history and the work that contemporary artists are making today that is touching on these topics. And I think that bringing out those strands and making, art more relevant in those ways allows for this, for these conversations to be had, but also allows for you to understand, where the artists are coming from. And I think that artists have a really incredible way of allowing us to see the truth and to see the world in different ways. And we should be embracing that as museums and cultural institutions.
And I wonder, because you obviously are working at this new and wonderful Edo Museum in Nigeria, right? Mm-hmm. I wondered, Aindrea, as the modern and contemporary art curator, concretely what you might want to see happen in a museum such as yours, or if you were Anne. What would you do if you were Anne? Seriously, I mean, let's.
I want to hear what you want to do as you.
Well, I think so. I mean, in Nigeria, we had some protests.
We can't really hear her. I mean, I can't. So we need.
Can you hear me? Should I speak louder? In Nigeria, recently we had some protests at the End SARS movement. It kind of did ripple into the international press. Not enough, I don't think, because there's incredible crossover with Black Lives Matter. But had the museum been built and been around at that time, I think that would have been an incredible opportunity for the artists. There were a lot of artists on the ground. They were taking photographs. They were creating incredible artworks. How can we have harnessed that energy? How could we have worked with those artists and those photographers to embrace those narratives and have that discussion? I think that's something that we would actively look at. Actually, in the upcoming MoMA show, it's called New Photography Now, there's a lot of that work then being shown, and that is, I think, a very important thing for an American institution to be shining light on. So that is, that's a great sort of case or proof of concept of what
cool.
Could be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sense I'm getting from all of these conversations is that people like me, people from the media, are pretty key to, I guess, the message getting across, right, Claire? I mean, how dependent or codependent are you on us media people, on media coverage?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I was talking to another journalist here earlier, and actually, you know, when we set up XR in the UK, we had a very professional set of people who flooded into the space and set up a press department, and we've always worked explicitly directly with the media a lot and held press conferences, for example, saying, you know, hello, hundreds of journalists, we're going to shut down central London this week, and we're going to do it here, 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 and here. Here's how it's going to work. I'm me. Everybody's open organising. You can find out who we all are. We don't use pseudonyms or cover our faces or whatever. And so that honesty and that openness was quite shocking, I think, to some people, particularly in the activist movements, because there's a lot of secrecy culture around activism. Obviously, you don't sort of broadcast it before you decide to go and break a window or throw some soup or whatever. But, you know, if you intend to bring thousands of people into somewhere like central London, then it's pretty blatantly obvious fact, but you have to tell people you're going to do it, otherwise no one comes, because no one knows about it, right? So we do work through the media in some respects. It's hugely problematic, not least because the media in Britain is rotten, disgusting, owned mostly by 4 non-dom billionaires who don't pay tax, who hate our country, who hate everyone, and have an enormous amount of vested interests and political friends, and mostly run the media in order to have political impact. So that's a bit of a problem. But I also, as a fashion person, you know, I've found it really problematic that the fashion press for a long time was not totally disinterested in the conversation about sustainability, for example. And people said, oh, well, there wasn't much going on in like 2005, 6, you know, 10, there was actually a lot of stuff to talk about. And I think, you know, because the media is actually corporatized, this is a huge problem, because it has values and incentives and drivers that don't actually align with the incentives of trying to do sustainable work. So the sustainability paradigm within corporatism, capitalism as it stands, doesn't work. It's just, for me, the concept of sustainability is in the bin. It's old, it's out of date, it never worked, it wasn't going to work. And we need journalists to kind of jump over the bit that they've like failed to deliver on, which is anything useful, really, in my opinion, to do with the urgency of climate or with sustainability, and step into a place where we're talking about regenerative system design, where we're talking about healing, about repair, about making things better. I think we need help to be able to come to terms with the position that we're in. And the media can either help or it can not help. And if it doesn't help,
I can see you have a love-hate relationship with us, which I understand.
No, well, I just want to implore
I think we're going to
artists and the media and anyone with a voice and anyone with a position of power to think, where I know I've got power, that should be converted into a conversation about responsibility.
Okay, let's go.
Can I say
Anne,
something
please,
about that too?
please.
One of the things I didn't mention is that, you know, some of our museums do a lot of things. Like, you know, there's a natural disaster somewhere and we collect supplies and we send it and we help people. During COVID, a lot of our museums were doing a lot to really help out our neighbors and our cities during the height of the crisis. And I thought to myself, you know, these things are important to do and nice, but what if we were actually going to have a sustainable impact? You know, sometimes we'll do an exhibition and the artist is thinking about climate, or we'll do an exhibition and somebody's thinking about, you know, refugee crisis or whatever. It's all connected, but, you know, whatever it may be. And I thought, what if we were to actually have a sustained interest? And so we wrote a social impact plan, and the 2 issues that we're focusing on for the next at least 5 to 10 years, probably permanently, that are important to our neighbors, important to our city, important to our world: mass criminalization and climate change. And so we're building collections around this, we're building exhibitions, we're building public programs so that there's a sustained visibility in our work moving forward.
So mass criminalization of human beings, you mean in general? Yeah.
Which, of course, includes our anti-racist work and more, but
Great. So, I mean, you have 3.5 minutes to ask questions in this fairly hot topic debate. Yes?
Hi, Mark Spiegler again. I have a question for Claire.
So, Mark Spiegler, former director of Art Basel.
Yeah, just on stage. So, you know, for those of you who made it here at 9:40. Claire, I have a question for you, which is, you know, as someone who's both sympathetic to culture and to the environmental issues, is there a discussion within your allies about whether attacking cultural institutions, which are both, frankly, groups of people whose followers tend to be actually on your side, and can be perceived as soft targets in comparison to the corporations and politicians who are actually at the core of the problem, could actually be alienating your potential base rather than bringing it towards you?
Yeah.
I think that's a fine question. I think a lot of people are asking us questions like that at the moment. I wouldn't dream of commenting on art market bubbles because I don't know anything about it. So for people who are asking these questions, I recommend you go and look at social change, look at the history of social change. If you do, you'll probably come across Martin Luther King when he said that the real enemy of the black population of America wasn't actually the white supremacist, the extremist. It was the white moderate, the person who preferred order to justice. You know, this is a very serious point. I'm not joking. Like, a lot of people who agree with me are a problem for my cause because they will sit around and talk like this and say, well, we agree, but I'm still going to catch loads of flights. I'm not going to support you in resistance. I'm actually not going to come out and say, I appreciate what you're doing, even if you end up in prison, even if you break a window, even if you hurt somebody's feelings. You know, I'd rather hurt someone's feelings than take away massive numbers of people's lives. And this is what we're faced with. You know, you said about being shaken up, and someone said something about art being a form of shamanism yesterday. I think breaking the window of a bank is a shamanic act. I think throwing soup up a painting is a shamanic act. It's shakes us awake.
Can I come in and follow up on that question? Because, Clare, I've noticed recently that Extinction Rebellion is sort of, has kind of scaled back some of their tactics and are not like blocking all of central London. You're revising your ways because perhaps, I don't know, you feel that there's been a backlash in public opinion, that that these events or sort of these actions have somehow turned people off. Am I mistaken?
I think through the media, terms in the UK that are prominent are things like eco-zealot and green extremist and stuff like that. I mean, it's laughable language because it's not language ordinary people ever use. It's now being
what I'm saying is that you've
by
changed,
our Home Secretary who's calling us eco-zealots on the TV.
You've changed your tactics.
But that's important to recognise that the media has formed an enormous campaign against us as individuals. And if you look at they love to press the hypocrisy button. Look, you've got clothes on. You're a hypocrite.
No, but Clare, answer my question.
It's a big problem.
You've changed your tactics. I mean, that's clear. Why did you change your tactics?
Because we wanted to get a message out to those other organisations who supposedly agree but never show up to do anything, and said, where are you? How low does the bar have to be for you guys to step towards us and show unity and to build what everyone likes to talk about, a movement of movements? It's hard to do that. It's hard to get everybody to pull together because we don't agree on everything. But I would say that, you know, Extinction Rebellion is a pro-democracy movement. We always have been. And there's something important about democracies being a place where you can disagree. Yes, we need to find unity and ways forwards, but we also need to disagree. And sometimes we need to disagree really loudly and respectfully and non-violently. And I fear that we're moving to a place where disagreements will become violent and people will look back and say, actually, those guys were terribly nice, don't you think? And we put them in prison. And now what we're facing is the breakdown of the social order. Pay attention to what the lawyers have been saying.
Okay,
they've been saying it's the end of law
we're running
and order
out of time here
because of this crisis.
We're going into overtime, but just basically, I wanted to thank all three of you for a very, very compelling and spicy conversation. And I wish we could go on all day, actually, because we've got a lot to say. And it's been wonderful having you. Thank you very much to all three of you.
Thank you.